Are we on?
And we're live, yes.
Oh, okay, excellent. Hi, everybody. Welcome. I'm Betsy Gilliland. I'm the current chair of the TESOL Second Language Writing Intersection, which is the host for this activity. And if you're watching us and you haven't been a part of the intersection, we would love to have you. TESOL International is a very large organization, and we are one of the most active intersections in the organization. We have over 1,000 members. And we talk about all things related to second language writing, not just ESL in schools. So whatever your interest is, if it has something to do with writing in another language, we would love to have you join us. And I'm going to turn it over to Sarah Henderson-Lee, who's co-coordinating the book club with me.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sarah. I'm in Minnesota. I'm currently on the board as a member at large. Just here to encourage you to spread the word about our intersection, but more specifically this book club. We tend to, now that we're back and going full force, we plan to have a couple of kind of chunk chapters together, maybe every couple of months. At least that's what we followed in the past. We hope to have at least one more of these live sessions during this spring semester. You can find us on Facebook. We often post our kind of guiding questions for what's coming next in terms of reading and discussion. But I think you can also join the listserv. But I'm not sure what's the best way, Betsy, to do that.
So we're now using a groups.io list, and you can just add yourself to the list. There's, if you're in the second language writing intersection, I've sent out a couple emails with information about it. I think you can just go to groups.io and search for second language writing book club, I think. Don't quote me on that.
Yeah, and we can find the link and also post it back on Facebook so it's higher in the queue.
Yeah. And in terms of organizing this is not a webinar. We wanted this to be a true discussion. So Nigel, Caplan, and Ann Johns are going to present a little bit about the book, but then please feel free to ask questions. If you want to type your question in the chat box, you can, and otherwise you can raise your hand in the participants section, and we'll let you know, we'll call on people if you're offering ideas.
All right. Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Nigel Caplan. I am at the University of Delaware, so it is evening for me here. So hello, wherever it is for you in the world. And by the magic of technology, my amazing co-editor, Ann Johns, is all the way on the other side of the continent in San Diego. Hello, Ann.
Hello.
So we're the co-editors of the book, and thanks so much to Betsy and Sarah for choosing this new volume, Changing Practices for the L2 Writing Classroom, Moving Beyond the 5-Paragraph Essay, for the book club. And I hope you all enjoy reading the book, and we're really looking forward to hearing from you. I was saying before, the book has a fun sort of history, and it's very much tied to this interest section. It started out as a panel, a second language writing interest section sponsored panel. I think it was the academic session at the TESOL conference, 2017. I'm checking in the front of the book. We did a panel, and I was the chair of the interest section at the time, and we put together a panel on moving beyond the 5-paragraph essay, and several of the authors in this book were on the panel. Ann Johns was our respondent to the panel, and before the session happened, Kelly Sipple, the ELT manager at the University of Michigan Press, said, "Nigel, you have to turn this into a book and we'll publish it." So I said, okay, fine. I said, but I'm not editing this myself. So I said, well, maybe I need a co-editor, and if you're going to sorry, you're going to see my entire family, I think, during this. If you're going to have a co-editor, here's a good tip. If any of you want to write a book, get the very best person you can possibly find. So I was very lucky to ask Anne, and we're very grateful to do this with her. So we had the original presenters from that panel, and then we went to our friends and colleagues in the second language writing world, and we asked them to contribute chapters, and we ended up with the book that you have. It came out late last year. And I think, we're really happy with what we have here. We tried to put all the ideas and arguments not just against the 5-paragraph essay, but for meaningful approaches to writing instruction in one place, which we hope is something that you'll find useful. Maybe rather than talk about all this stuff, because there's lots more we could say about it, let's just maybe show you the chapters that are in the book. And do you want to say something about the structure of the book, and then we'll see if there's questions, and if not, we can talk some more.
Okay, why don't you move it down? Let's see. Sorry.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, all right. Basically what we did is we say, one of the things we asked was, what kinds of questions do we have to answer? So we've got, is 5-paragraph essay a genre? Is the 5-paragraph essay universal? Is it transferable? And should we be teaching it to students as they prepare for being tested? And those issues permeate the book, but they're very strongly done in the chapters that are there. If you do the next one, we'll show you how it's organized. Okay, we have an overview. The first 1, 2, 3 chapters and the 10th chapter really give us the general conclusions about the nature of the 5-paragraph essay, okay? And what it's good for and not good for, okay? Then next, Nigel, can I do this, do you think? No, I can't. You'll have to do it. Can you go down to the next slot?
That one on?
Yeah. So we said, all right, we've got these major topics. How are we going to organize them? And so you'll see that we have elementary students, secondary students, college undergraduates, and advanced undergraduates all dealt with here. And of course, graduate students, which is the Chris Feek area. So that's how we organized it, basically. And that's all I need to say about that, I think.
Yeah, does anyone want to jump in? This is supposed to be a discussion. We do have some stuff we can present, but we'd far rather take your questions and comments if anyone has had a chance to read some of the book, or even if not. I think you get a sense of roughly what our position is here. So you can ask a question either by unmuting yourself, or if you go to the chat box, and to do that, you wiggle your cursor over the screen, you'll get the Zoom menu bar, and if you click, find the chat option, it's under More, and it should be Alt-H on most computers. You can type stuff in there, or just unmute yourselves and jump in. There is about 25 people on the call, so hopefully we don't have 25 people talking at once, but I suspect not. You're all, nice, friendly people, I assume.
I just wanted to say that I read the book, and I loved what I read. My problem is, where do I go from here? Because
exactly.
There just aren't any. I mean, there's one, Inside Writing, which I used.
Thank you. You did. Nobody uses that book. How exciting.
Because our students, if they don't pass, they repeat a whole level. So I have to have 3 sets of text, one for spring, one for summer, one for fall. So I've managed to eke out a couple of semesters worth of assignments based on Inside Writing, but I still have a hole, and there's nothing out there.
So your question is the question we get asked a lot, right, Anne, which is, okay, why then where's the textbooks, right? And I've said this many times at TESOL conferences, that if an alien was dropped into the publisher's hall at TESOL, they would, looking at the books, readily presume that all writing is always a 5-paragraph essay with exactly the same form across 5 or 6 different modes, right? Because that's what almost every writing book out there does. And I'm not criticizing authors for doing that. There's many reasons that gets done. You kindly mentioned Inside Writing, which is a series that I did with Oxford. I co-authored 2 of those and helped design the series, and we did try to do something more or less genre-based. No, it's genre-based for a mass market, so there's challenges with it too. Anne and I think we can tell people this now. We're working on a book to put our money where our mouth is, or well, someone else's money where our mouth is, I guess, and try to show what an advanced level, and novice undergraduate level, advanced IEP level writing textbook would look like. Obviously, the Swales and Feek for graduate students, but it really doesn't work beyond that. But you're right, the materials really aren't there. So, you know, Anne, what do we tell people when they ask us this, other than hang on a few more months until we finally finish the one we're writing?
I think that's one of them. Also, we do try at the very end of this book to make some suggestions. Yeah. Oh, you're going in the wrong direction, but that's all right.
Oh, I'm going this way on purpose, actually.
Oh, okay, sorry. We do try to say where we go from here, but we agreed that we have to. There are two books coming up. Can I mention both of them, Chris Tardy? One is a facts book on genre-based instruction, which Chris is the chief editor for, chief writer, and Nigel and I are on. And then we're also doing a textbook, which is called, why don't you explain it, Nigel?
So the idea here is, so this is, when this got transferred to Google Slides, it went a bit wacky, but this is kind of, what you're seeing on the screen is the typical table of contents for, well, it should be 3, but the bottom one got cut off, but 3 market leading ESL textbook series. And, you know, I won't name them, but if you know the books, you can probably recognize them. And one of our problems with this is these are built around modes, right? Description, comparison, cause, effect, classification, and everything's called an essay. And I think my colleague Monica is on the call. I see her on the chat. We've been joking about what on earth is a descriptive essay. I, for the life of me, I can't figure it out. And yet many of our curricula have this written into it. Now, there's lots of ways in which we use description, we use cause and effect, we use even classification, or my favorite, problem solution. But calling it all an essay is where you get into this sort of 5-paragraph essay tedium. So what we're trying to advocate, and this is something you can do without a textbook, is think about, well, okay, we started reframing it, not in terms of modes, which I think just drops people into this 5-paragraph rabbit hole, but in terms of actions. And we're taking Carolyn Miller's classic definition of genre as social action, right, which is straight out of the rhetorical genre studies tradition. So there are actions, there are things we do. Writing does something, and most writing does more than one thing. And so we're trying to see, well, what are these sort of underlying actions that involve things like explaining and arguing and analyzing? And then in what genres or just tasks, even if you don't like the term genre, it scares people whether or not they can pronounce it, you know. So where do we see this? So, you know, sending email, and some of these are what we're calling genres in action, so as genres we see maybe in the real world. Some of them are pedagogical genres, genres you only see in the classroom, but they're still valid, even if they're in a classroom setting. So an extended definition is a great short genre to teach. I was just teaching that to a group of MA TESOL students. I love data commentary, press releases on the chat. We got things like reviews, product reviews, restaurant reviews, book reviews, and down to things like case studies. And the trick is, once you've seen what we do, either from the examples of genre analysis in this book or in other books and other materials that we've written, this is all stuff you can easily try yourself at home. None of this is particularly none of this is rocket science. So how do we analyze genre? We read a bunch of examples. We figure out what are the common rhetorical moves or stages or steps. We look for recurrent language patterns in each step. And we then guide students through analyzing and then reading mentor texts and then producing their own text in the genre. So it's kind of looking at, you know, looking at the students' needs and looking at the kind of things that students might write, that practices skills either that they need right now or that we can reasonably predict they'll need in the future, finding a text type, whether it's quote unquote authentic, which I think is a problematic term, or pedagogical, looking for examples, breaking it down and then writing it with them. And it takes some time to develop those, but it's a lot more fun than having to, you know, read endlessly, endless 5-paragraph essays. And do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah,
some great conversation on the chat here. I'll read out in a minute.
Freshman, where I think what we have to do is to help them see the variety. In other words, we talk about a rhetorical flexibility or whatever it happens to be. I just finished a semester with freshmen in which the first thing we did was case studies, which is pretty easy. The next thing we did was problem solution. Why is homelessness intractable in San Diego, if you've read about us? And third was a very short data commentary where the kids went out and interviewed people. It was a very successful class, partially because they were exposed to a lot of different kinds of ways to approach the same. The theme was homelessness, which is a big problem in our community. And we just varied it in different ways and took the same sources and did different things with them, whatever it happens to be, so that they could see what the possibilities are.
Yeah.
I enjoyed it. They said very nice things.
Nan, you said in the chat that you want to keep the language academic. I think one thing we really have to do, and one thing I think some of the later chapters in the book try to show, is that we need to broaden our understanding of what academic language is, that it isn't monolithic. And this is one of the big myths of a lot of ESL programs and writing curricula, and I would say a lot of freshmen, certainly some freshman first year writing courses. And for those of you outside the US, if anyone's listening, these are the sort of required first semester or first year courses in writing that most North American universities require. And I think we've had I think that in ESL, because most of us are not actually teaching in the university, unlike people like Anne, I'm in an intensive English program, we think we know what students need in the university, and we think they are essays and research papers. But then when you go and look at the research done by, say, Anne's colleague Dan Meltzer in California, and anyone who's actually studied syllabi and courses, what you see, first of all, is massive variety, huge degrees of idiosyncrasy, with assignments being radically different from each other, right? And you don't see massive amounts of extended writing in most universities. Now, you know, your mileage may vary, right? You may be at a university where students do massive amounts of writing across the curriculum, long papers everywhere. Students in my university are simply not doing that. But they are doing a really wide range of things. And so it's not just, in fact, very little of it is called an essay. So there are responses, there are lit reviews, there are policy briefs, case studies, response writing is one of the big ones, right? I'm just going to post a link in the chat. Somebody mentioned case studies. I came across a wonderful website at the University of British Columbia, open access case studies written by senior undergraduates, perfect for deconstruction. Yeah, there's little bits of it in the last chapter I wrote for the book, Anne. So we've got some. Okay. I just added some recently there. But here's this is great. And I just saw on Twitter someone from UBC's wonderful Vantage College. I don't know if anyone's from UBC on the call, do jump in. Who's using these as a model for first year students to write their own simpler case studies. And yes, I think Margie mentioned policy briefs, another really accessible genre. So these are academic verging to professional genres, right? But think about the types of language they require, the types of rhetorical knowledge they require. I think this is definitely academic, in the sense that academic means doing the work of the university. And I would definitely refer you to Sylvia Pessoa and Tom Mitchell's chapter in our book, where they really break down the differences between disciplines. And I think that is really just fascinating to look into. There's some great stuff on
beyond that, the differences among faculty within disciplines.
Absolutely.
I mean, the same course is taught in very different ways by very different people. I think one of the things that also is important for students in terms of their success is the sort of soft skills, if you will, the fact that they have to email professors and find and get things from them and that kind of thing. So that's what that first part is. I spend quite a bit of time with their interacting with the big guys on campus.
Someone's commented on the chat that the word essay is often used as sort of a shorthand in universities. So a colleague in Taiwan has commented on the chat that there is a course simply called essay writing and is seen as an intro level academic writing course. I think that's very common. And one thing we realized when we were writing the book, and I think we said this somewhere, is that essay has become a sort of shorthand for almost a metonym for any type of student writing. And I would question whether a term that means any type of writing is actually a useful term. And so one thing I try to encourage people to do, and I'm going to do the same thing, do a professional development thing in my department in a few weeks, and I say this all the time at conferences, is see if you can call your assignment absolutely anything else except an essay. And I'm drawing completely on Anne's work here, and she's been saying this, I know, for a very long time, but is there anything else you could possibly call it, right?
Great idea. What is it? What can we call it? I mean, everybody is essay oriented.
Well, I think you call it a paper, if nothing else.
Well, we call it a paper, or a, like we took this semester for the first time, our students did an informational poster based on Q's writing assignment for an extended definition.
Uh-huh.
And it worked out. It was great. We had a poster session. All the other classes came, administration came. It was really awesome, but I want a book with all that stuff.
Yeah. So I think that, again, that's why we're saying one way to think about it is, well, what is the text? Not what is the text, but what is the text doing, right? And that gets us to the point about action, right? One of the key terms, Chris Tardy, I know, is on the call, maybe she would like to jump in, but one of the ways in which you've got a genre is that people know what to call it. That's sort of one of the John Swales definitions, right? Users of a genre tend to know what a genre is called. They tend to have a name for it. And words like essay and research paper, no two people actually agree what they mean. I once had a group of MBA faculty in a room. I was doing needs analysis, and I said, what's important, in your courses? And they said research papers. So I said, well, what is a research paper for you? And I had 4 faculty and I think 6 different answers. So you've got to, at that point, you've got to question, okay, is this really a vastly useful thing? The other thing to think about is that many genres require students to do many different things. Even if they're called an essay, they might be asking students to do radically different things within that. And the problem is that as soon as students hear the word essay, it sort of triggers what Amy Devitt has called genre baggage, that they sort of drag with them, and they immediately drop into writing the essay. And I think we've all seen that, and you just sort of bury your head. I always joke, I get cover letters. I do portfolio assessment. So I ask the students to write cover letters, and there's always someone who'll try to write their cover letter as an essay in the third person, which is very bizarre. Many essays were written, much feedback was received, and I sometimes get to the end of these and I'm not sure who did what, where, and when, right? Someone's put a comment on the board that the 5-paragraph essay is a genre. We actually, that was a question that Chris Tardy asked us at the end of our panel, and we thought it was such a good question. We asked her to write a chapter about it. We do not believe it's a genre, which I know is a little controversial, and I think it's comforting perhaps to call it a genre, but we would argue quite strongly, I think, that the 5-paragraph essay lacks the key requirements of a genre, which is to communicate a particular function to a particular audience in a particular way. It lacks the particularity that genres need to have. It lacks the idea of social action. It lacks the specificity. And I don't know if anyone wants to jump in on that. You're welcome to disagree with us. Many people do, but
is Chris still on?
I'm still here. Yep, I'm here.
Why don't you comment on that, Christy?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I can say too much more than what Nigel has said and what's in the chapter, but I think for me, I think it's really, really important to help students distinguish the two, because I think when they start calling everything a genre loses its power as a learning tool to think about writing as situated and responsive to situations. Calling everything a genre because it has a form sort of dissolves the value of genre.
I think so too. I put up a quote that we really love from Elizabeth Wardle, who's a fabulous composition scholar. in a great little online book called Bad Ideas About Writing that I strongly recommend. And in her chapter, which is a critique of the 5-paragraph essay, in fact, so it's always nice when someone like that is, saying the same thing as us. She says there is no such, the problem with the essay is that it teaches writing in general. And she says there is no such thing as writing in general. Writing is always in particular. I just love that. It's the kind of line that you look at and think, wow, I wish I'd written that. Mine isn't nearly as nice, but it's sort of we're perpetuating a myth if we say that all writing is the same and then, oh, it's just another genre and they'll learn something else later. What I fear is, and what I've seen is that students simply don't. So on the chat, Priscilla has commented about doing inquiry projects or inquiry projects, depending on your pronunciation there. I'd love to hear more about that because we've written an inquiry project into our new book, but I'm curious whether what I think of that is the way other people think of it. But I've been intrigued by that as a concept as well. And it fits with that whole idea as writing as inquiry, writing to learn, writing as a form of discovery, of finding information and marshalling it, rather than the form, which is the essay. It's the process, the inquiry, the thinking process.
I see something here following up on Chris's. What is that question? Something, is everybody looking at the chat?
I'm trying to, feel free to read aloud because it's a bit, it's very fast moving, which I appreciate, but feel free to jump in audio by audio.
Yeah, there's also Ekiyama has raised a hand.
Oh, go for it.
I don't know if you want to unmute yourself and orally ask your question.
Hello, this is Priscilla here. I don't know how to raise a hand, and I don't know if you can hear me.
We hear you.
We can.
So what I have seen about inquiry projects is more first project-based. So it's the student's interest in a topic, and then the freedom to do research in, of course, in elementary school, we can be more lenient and let them Google information, but in undergrad we want the students to start searching for peer-reviewed articles and so on. But the main point of the inquiry project is to find what has already been done, what people are talking about, and then put their thoughts into it and say, well, when I read this, it made me think of A, B, and C, or I agree or I disagree, or this can be a problem, and then I found this other solution. So it's much more, it's not the essay format, because the students can play with the theme in different ways.
What level do you teach, Priscilla?
I'm now teaching. I'm a PhD student, full-time PhD student. So I'm a teaching assistant, and I'm teaching level 201, which is like freshman, sophomore.
Okay,
yeah,
so you're teaching college students
at the University of South Carolina.
Yeah. We framed our inquiry project as a problem solution project because we think problem solution is a really powerful. Now that's an organizational tool, right? But within that, there is so much that you have to do to investigate a problem, its causes, solutions, and evaluations. And it's one that's quite accessible, I think. You can go from there to case study as a pretty short hop as well.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for that. I think that sounds great. I do want to comment on choosing sources, but maybe later. So I think it's an interesting question.
If I can just answer one more thing, what I really find interesting about the inquiry project is that it starts from a question, an authentic question that the student has about a theme, and then their exercise of finding answer to that question is what's really valuable. It doesn't matter where they find the actual sources, but once they find the sources, they have to weigh if it's a reliable source, if they can really use that answer to answer their inner question. And that process is phenomenal.
Good. We have an essential question project, which is not in here, it's in the textbook, right? But I mean, the question was, does being bilingual make you smarter? And one of the things that the kids saw, of course, was all of this research that's being done now, showing it does, right? So they went out and hunted around, and it was, they did a very, very nice, they did good papers on that.
I think one thing to take from both Priscilla and Anne's comments there is notice that what we're talking about is writing that has a purpose beyond producing a piece of writing.
Mhm.
And I think that's what really bothers me most about a lot of writing instruction that I see. My world is the intensive English program world, but we sort of intersect with first year composition. And I think too much writing is done for the purpose of producing a particular type of writing. Why are we doing this? Well, we're doing it so they can produce a cause and effect essay, whatever the heck that is, right? And when we reduce writing to this sort of mundane process of jumping through hoops and ticking boxes, checking boxes, then no wonder the students aren't engaged. No wonder they produce boring formulaic writing and, dare I say it, plagiarize, because I think it comes out of boredom and lack of meaning. If we don't invest the assignments with meaning, and I love to refer to Neil Lerner's Meaningful Writing Project. It's a different topic entirely, but take a look at it. It's all online. Because students remember when they are given meaningful writing projects, and they do respond to them, and that's what we're trying to get to, is towards meaningful writing. I do see that there is a hand raised, or there was a hand raised. Ekiyama, do you want to jump in? I'm sorry, we lost you briefly.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi. I think I put up the hand thing by accident.
Oh, okay. Do you have a comment or question anyway?
Well, I do have a comment. I agree completely with focusing on question strategies and having students question their surroundings in terms of a problem solution, working on problem solution papers. Because I find that actually gets them to think outside of, well, it's something that is only done for an English class, and it doesn't have any real effects on their lives or anything. And they tend to be more engaged when you get them to focus on that aspect of it. So I agree completely, and I also have to say I agree with the person who said that using, having students actually go through the actual questioning process in terms of the step-by-step analysis actually works really well in getting them to engage more with the writing and figuring out what they should be getting from the course, as in skill development, and not just, oh, well, I'm good at grammar, kind of a thing.
Yes, and part of it is decoupling. Thank you for those comments. I completely agree. Part of it, of course, is understanding and this is maybe a different topic, but one that would be interesting for us to talk about, is sort of reframing and understanding the relationship between grammar and writing, right? Because I see both extremes and I don't like either of them. So I see writing treated as nothing but an expression of a student's grammatical proficiency, right? Which is the count the errors tendency, right? And we fall into, and anytime you assign timed writing and you assess it on a rubric that involves proficiency, accuracy and grammar, that's what you're basically doing. You're basically, and we do this, we reduce writing, and we don't really read for content, because who writes anything intelligent in 45 minutes or an hour, right? Or 20 minutes on the GMAT, whatever it is, the TOEFL, these things. It's not about the content, it's about the way you write it. And a lot of it devolves down into that. So on the one hand, you've got grammar is nothing but an expression of a student's presumed underlying writing proficiency, as if timed writing is a way to tap into that, something that I find disturbing. And on the other hand, you have grammar's got nothing to do with it. We're not going to talk about language at all. We're just going to talk about writing as expression. And I think both are dangerous for ESL context, for multilingual learners, English learners, however you want to talk about the students we write about and we talk about. So I think that what we need to have is a pedagogy, which is why I promote the systemic functional linguistic genre-based pedagogy, because more so than other genre-based pedagogies, I would say, it puts grammar in the right place. It doesn't say it's all about grammar, and it doesn't say it's not about grammar. It says that, okay, grammar is the systems of making meaning. There are grammatical patterns which are functional and useful and meaningful at different stages of a particular text. So it allows us to focus on grammar as meaning, not just as accuracy, which isn't to say accuracy doesn't play a role. It does play a role in many high stakes genres. But it's thinking about where the language fits in a second language writing class, and indeed in a first language writing class. But of course, that's not my concern. I'd have to do that. So I think that question of where language fits is, I think, worth thinking about, and we touch on it in the book, maybe not as much as we could do, but we certainly are in our the work we're doing right now on both the projects we're working on.
Well, TESOL and Mitchell to touch on it.
They do,
and a place to go if you're interested in what SFL does and what he's talking about, the interaction of text and grammar. Chapter 8, I think, is really a good one for that.
Yeah, and maybe we can get Sylvia and Tom to do one of these chats, because they're really fascinating. And if you're going to TESOL, they often present there. I'm presenting with them at TESOL, and you should definitely come to those sessions because they're always fun. There's another issue that was raised in the chat box. Margie Wald, hi Margie, our friend from TESOL and previous chair of this group and many other things, was commenting. Hello, good to hear you, not see you. Margie, you're commenting about something that I think is really interesting, and we've been, I know, talking about a lot over the last year, Anne, is the question of whether an assignment we give in class needs to have a reality outside of class. And this is what David Russell, right, calls a pedagogical genre. And you're much more into this, but we've both agreed this is something that's important. This is not, the fact that it doesn't exist outside the classroom is not in and of itself a reason not to teach it, right?
Yes, I agree. I mean, if this is Margie, I didn't raise my hand, I just started talking. It's my way. No, I've been trying to figure out with that type of paper that I was talking about, which is kind of, you've read a text or several texts in class that bring up a number of concepts, and then use those concepts and apply them to a real world situation. It happens, I see this paper topic in many, many, many different disciplines. And the role of concepts and the ways in which content classes focus on and revolve around these sets of theories and concepts. I think that we need to help students figure out how they're going to manipulate that information. And there are kind of moves that happen, and there are, so I've been working through trying to figure out how to create a set of genre-related materials for that type of paper. But I feel that I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about this in my first year writing class at UC Berkeley, because it is the kind of paper that a lot of students are going to be writing. And whether it's a real-world paper or not, it's a real-world paper for ththese students in the next 4 years. And so,
right.
Yeah, I've always been puzzled by this idea that the university classroom is not a real world. Can we all agree we are real people? Our students are real people.
I guess it's like that you're not communicating an idea for the same, I mean, it's just a different purpose, I guess.
Yeah.
I mean, you are communicating information to a particular audience, and that audience does have a set of expectations. It's that you're not engaging in a conversation in the way that some other writing might really be a conversation, because the professor of that course knows the answer already, in a sense, right? So but that doesn't make it not real world for these students. It's just that that's the type of goal that I've seen a lot that I haven't really thought about enough in terms of genre. And so it's the one that kind of captured my attention last semester.
What do you tell your students your goals are, Margie, when you give this? In other words, what are we going toward here?
Oh, I actually pull assignments from disciplines, from different disciplines, and I show them how they're all essentially asking them to do that same thing, just in very different. Perhaps it ends up in very different ways, and but it's a very common assignment. And so I'll pull from a couple of different disciplines, and then even for discussion sections of reports, you essentially are doing that as well, right? So really showing them that there are lots of different applications of this in the classroom outside mine, because they don't care about mine as much as they might care about the ones in their disciplines, right? And then I say, okay, well, we don't all share a discipline. So, and if you're doing something more like what you've had students do, which is to be those investigators of their disciplines and then writing papers towards their disciplines. But if I want to pick something that we can all share in terms of some reading skills and other things, then I'll pick something that I think is accessible to a lot of people, and has a lot of different ways in which it can be applied. And then we do it together.
I think, and I go back and forth on this because some of my colleagues who are currently in the chat say things like, well, if you have them explore the syllabi of courses, or you have them go and talk to faculty, that's study skills, that's not writing. My argument would be that students really need to learn what's going on in a particular classroom, how he or she can manipulate the situation to make it work for him or her. And I think my students practice role play about prompts. I send them off and they ask questions of faculty, and it's very interesting. But what we're trying to do is to get them understand their audience, and their audiences are really foreign to them in many cases. All of my students are born in another country, and these guys and women who are running their classes are very different from them for the most part. So it's another way to talk about audience, and I don't think we're doing too much of that.
Yeah, and just to pick up on what Anne said, I completely agree. And Nigel, they're just writing for the instructor who knows everything. But I think Anne is absolutely right to say that they don't necessarily know what it means to write to their instructor necessarily, right?
That's right.
Who is that instructor as an audience? And I think what the work you do with syllabus deconstruction, and I think is fabulous, and we've added it into our own program, or I added it in. We is a bit grand. I threw it in, and I'm hoping some people are doing it. Because, one thing that, it's so, our students, we're talking about, and not about the mainstream students, we're talking about either international students or multilingual students, students who are first generation, right? This is or students studying in English medium universities outside of English speaking countries in the sort of English lingua franca world. What they don't have, and I'm not framing this in a deficit way, but they bring different cultural schema, different cultural capital, to use the Bourdieu term, which I very much like in this discussion. And they don't necessarily come with the same set of expectations. It's not better or worse, but it is different of what it means to write for this kind of audience. And it is a special task. And that's why I think some of my students miss steps in their writing, because they think, well, reader knows all this. Well, yes, they do. So a question to ask the students, exactly as Anne says, is, okay, what is the purpose of the writing you're doing? And the question to ask colleagues is, what is the purpose of the writing you're assigning? And that's a really interesting question to ask. You have to ask it a little less aggressively than I just did, which I'm among friends here. But.
If they're told to write an essay, which is often common among the first and second years, they trot off and say, I'm sorry, Dr. Caplan, but what does essay mean? When you say essay, what is it? I mean, can I have an example of something that might be a good essay in your, because they're just saying text, and it could be anything. So they really need a lot of, if they're not given very good prompts, they really need to do a lot of work on their own.
And one thing we strongly believe, and I know that's something Sylvia and Tom talk about in their chapter, and I think Dana addresses this issue too, and many of the authors do in our book, is the need to help students advocate for themselves. Because most of our colleagues in the university, with no disrespect to them, do not know how to teach writing. They may well know how to write in their own fields extremely well, or not, but they have not been trained to teach writing. That haven't been trained to teach in most cases. That's not a requirement very often. And again, this is not to criticize anyone, and I certainly don't engage in blaming the teacher. But if we can teach students to ask the right questions, and yeah, they'll be annoying at first, but it will push the teachers to clarify what the prompt really is and what the expectations are, and they can begin to get at the genre without necessarily using the word genre. And I do think that any sort of IEP, preparation, pathways, first year comp program, graduate preparation program, I think part of it has to involve that sort of building of a repertoire of good questions that you can ask about a task, a prompt, an essay, whatever it actually is. Starting with the question that I think I've come to think is the critical question is, do you want me to express an opinion in this piece?
Right.
And I wrote a piece on this in the Journal of English for Academic Purposes at the end of last year, and I think that critical distinction between presenting information and arguing, right? And getting away from this idea that everything's an argument, with all due respect to Andrea Lunsford, no, it isn't. Arguments are arguments, other things are other things. Getting away from the idea that everything is, dare I say, they say, I say, no, it's not. But getting to this point, because this is the question my students really struggle with, well, where should I put my opinion? It's like, this is a summary. I don't want you to give an opinion. Save it. I'd love to hear your opinions, but not in this particular piece of writing. I have my students writing syntheses, and I have a student now who he wants me to tell him the percentage of the paper that should be his own view. I said, no, you're asking the wrong question here, right? So it's a matter of trying to help students understand whether you take it from the level of genre or from moves or from rhetoric or audience, however you approach it. I think there's many ways into this. Getting them to understand the situation, what rhetoricians would call the rhetorical situation.
To promote my odd chapter,
it's not
on page 149, there's a series of questions that students can ask. I've been using this for 30 years. That students can ask faculty, particularly if it's not in the prompt. If it's in the prompt, then in fact they can identify it. But this is really helpful sometimes with the kids. I mean, just basically, how do you want me to organize it? If this is an essay, does it start with the hook and then? Anyway, but I think that whole business about understanding your audience is extremely important. And every faculty member I know teaches differently. I mean,
yes,
and gives different kinds of writing prompts.
Yeah, there was one that I analyzed in the paper, and I've presented this before. It's a course being offered in our program. It's an art history course. And the assignment is just titled research paper. And the prompt is very, very vague, with all due respect to the instructor. Sitting down with him in half an hour, I came to a very clear idea by asking questions like the ones Anne poses here. I came to a very clear idea of what students wanted to do. It wasn't hard. He had very clear ideas. It's a great assignment, in fact. But I did wonder how well equipped the students were to ask those questions, and how well equipped the instructor and teaching assistant were to explain that, or whether they were just waiting to get bad first drafts, which I don't think we want to be in the business of. I wanted to pick up something else about pedagogical genres that came up in the discussion. Yeah, so pedagogical genres outside of the composition class don't exist sort of as free-form things, right? They exist within a disciplinary framework, and there is a presumption that they are building some sort of disciplinary knowledge or expertise or apprenticeship. In other words, writing is actually doing something. So a lab report, which is a purely pedagogical genre, is doing something in a biology class. My favorite, the case study analysis in a Harvard-style business class. The Harvard case study does not exist outside of the business classroom. It was invented by Harvard Business School in order, believe it or not, to give Harvard Business School some credibility at a time when business schools had no credibility next to medical schools. So what did they do? They looked next door at the Harvard Medical School, which is, you know, a pretty good medical school. And how do they teach? Well, they teach through cases. Now their cases, unfortunately, have a habit of ending up, you know, dead, but they were looking at, they look at patients, they look at cases, and they analyze them. So they said, well, maybe we'll do the same thing with businesses, and they came up with the case analysis. The whole genre network around case analyses exists only in the MBA or business classroom, but it's a very well described genre. There are published papers on this. Many people have looked into it. I've looked into it as well, and it is it's a teaching tool. Students, if they don't get what it is, or they approach it as an essay, they're not only going to fail the assignment, they're going to miss the entire pedagogical point. So writing exists even when it's purely pedagogical within sort of that disciplinary framework. And I think one of the goals of writing instruction should be to help students sort of move in and out of those frameworks. So being able to see, okay, we're talking about problem solution. This could be used for a case analysis. It could be used for a case study. It could be used for a policy brief. It could be used for an op-ed, right? As Anna's shown, a lot of op-ed columns are structured as problem solution. They're all different ways of realizing the action in a different genre, and they will all require different choices in terms of the audience and setting, so rhetorical choices and linguistic choices. That's this idea of rhetorical flexibility. If you're rhetorically rigid in a North American university system, you're in trouble, because the variation, as Anne said, is so wide. So that sort of concept of rhetorical flexibility by practicing the same action across multiple genres, both pedagogical and, if you like, authentic or real world, I think is going to train these habits of thinking and writing.
Akima has a nice point about, let's see, I just missed it, how students can articulate clarity. I mean, basically, she's asking about clarity, I think. Is that right, Akima? You're saying, I want my students to be able to be clear. How can they clearly express their ideas?
Yeah, that's where I come in. That's what I actually focus on, because it gets, and I let them know that clarity is actually the point of the class. Because if you cannot express yourself clearly, then meaning doesn't happen. And it kind of gets into the idea of, well, maybe initially your grammar may not be perfect, but is your idea clear in your head? Have you put the idea down on paper or online or somewhere, or can you explain it to somebody else, and then you can work on refining that. So my classes actually focus more on clarity than anything else, and the genres that I use are the medium by which I'm giving them practice.
And give us one activity you use working on clarity. What do you do?
So my classes focus mainly on discussion. And so I have students read an assignment, some reading that they have. Then they come to class. Well, they do a reading. They do what I have them do as a reading response. So they kind of do a mini paper of like 250 words saying, okay, what's the title of the reading? What's their take on it? And a quote that they can use to back up whatever their take is. So they're already looking at, okay, what I think is going on and so on. Then they come to class and we talk about clarity in terms of, did you understand what the author was saying here? If you have any questions, let's fix that and make it clear. And then now tell me what you think of what the ideas the author has had is. So then we translate that into their own writing. So you have to have a clear idea of what you want to say. And if you can articulate that, if you can say it in speech, usually it's easier then to actually write it in whatever form that you're looking at.
At least say it in speech initially. Yeah, good.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you. Okay, I see somebody's getting into testing.
Yeah, a number of people have been asking, this is bound to come up, right? So this is one of those questions that you know is going to come up when you talk about the 5-paragraph essay. Someone's going to talk about the standardized tests, and it's fine, and we should do, because these are important for some of our students, right? And it depends on the context you're in. I'm not going to steal the thunder from Deb Krizan and Todd Rucker's chapter, which I think sets out the case. But basically, when you look at these tests, the idea that these tests require a 5-paragraph essay is in itself a myth. None of the tests say you must write a 5-paragraph essay. Some of them do describe something to which you could respond with a 5-paragraph essay or with a number of other things. The research does not clearly show that a 5-paragraph essay gets the highest scores. It does show that it's quite good for getting mediocre scores, which may or may not be students' goals. So there's 2 questions here to me. One is, well, there's 3 questions, I'm sorry. Does the test actually require a 5-paragraph essay? And for most of the tests we're talking about, the answer is no. In fact, many of them explicitly say, do not require a 5-paragraph essay. And I'll come back to my definition of a 5-paragraph essay in a minute. It's got nothing to do with the number of paragraphs, which is something I think is quite important to state. And I'm going to bring Betsy in on this because she's got far more expertise in testing than I do and in assessment. But the one question is, does it require it? And the test explicitly don't. The second is, whether or not they say you require it, can you do well with a 5-paragraph essay? And when you look at a lot of the rubrics, you'll see, well, actually, maybe not, because the things that the rubrics value are not the things often that are taught in very sort of formulaic 5-paragraph essay approaches. And then the next question is the washback question, which is, of course, Deborah Cruzan's work, which is, well, even if they do, does that mean it's what we should teach or what we should only teach? And of course, we would say no to that. But I think rather than just say, oh, it's on the test, we must teach it, I think we've got to break it down by exactly what do we mean by it's on the test. Betsy, do you have anything to add to that? Because I know this is something that you've written about as well.
Yeah, well, and I was very pleased to see that Deborah and Todd quoted extensively from my book in their chapter in your book.
Yes, very extensively. I feel like you do too.
No, and I actually, Anne brought me in to join her and Dana in a workshop on this last fall, since you couldn't go, Nigel, to TESOL. But I think there's been some really good discussion in the chat box here, where I think there is that myth that the 5-paragraph essay is what you need. And in my own research in high schools, I definitely saw that. I mean, it was a kind of middle level high school, not really low performing, but not really high performing. And so they were very much under pressure to get the students to pass standardized tests. And the teachers believed that the way to do that was to get the students writing within the formula of the 5-paragraph essay, to the point that they were giving them fill in the blank sentences that they had to memorize and sentence frames and things like that. But I think the key is to go back and analyze the prompts again. Is this a prompt that actually lends itself to writing 5 paragraphs? Is it a prompt that you do the formulaic general introduction, thesis statement that makes an argument, several paragraphs that each make a point that supports the argument, and a conclusion that wraps it up? Or is it a prompt that actually should be answered in a different way? And I remember when I was teaching students in a program where the timed essays were always summary and response, and it was usually some sort of social issue that they had to summarize, read about and summarize, students were really resistant to the idea that maybe instead of a thesis statement that had 3 points that you underline and then you draw a circle around each of the topic sentences or whatever it was, that instead maybe you should summarize it and then explain what the problem is and analyze why it's a problem and maybe propose a solution or something like that. And that, oh my goodness, that just...
They didn't like that.
They didn't like that because that wasn't what they had been told. They'd been told in high school over and over and over again that you have to have 5 paragraphs and you have to write these sentences in these places.
I think here's an example again. I see something from Priscilla Costa, who says TESOL and IELTS require essays. Essay just means text there, in my view. In other words, it means a piece of writing. It does not necessarily mean a 5-paragraph essay. They say essay because they don't know what else to say. But it's really a text responding to a prompt.
We're getting some strange, let's stop. There's some strange feedback going on. Has that stopped? We got some strange feedback. Betsy, can you just mute yourself for a sec? And everyone, if you just... Is that better now?
No.
Not sure about somebody. I don't know if you had some kind of drum line outside your office there. It sounded like.
Yeah, it seems to be when Anne's talking, it comes up. So I don't know.
And I think you've actually got an accompaniment.
All right, I'll stop talking.
Yeah.
It's going on all the time for me.
It comes
So
up.
it may be something in my computer.
Oh, sorry about this.
Anyway, we are only a minute away from the hour, so we said this would be an hour-long session, so we might want to wrap up within the next few minutes.
Sure, I'm trying to see if there's any other questions. If anybody else wants to shout out questions, there's a bunch on the chat I'm trying to get to. Somebody has made the comment about the use of the 5-paragraph essay as a crutch. That's a term that Christina Ortmeyer-Hooper uses in what I think is a fabulous chapter, and I really like that, also working in the high school context, as Betsy was talking about. And there is an assumption that it's a scaffold, and it isn't. It's a crutch, and it is, no one wants to throw the crutch away. The important thing, of course, with the scaffold is after you put it up, you take it down. Right. And that simply does not happen. Very nice, some very interesting comments about summary and response. I started using summary and response as a final assessment in our writing class. I don't love it, but it's better than what we were doing, I can say.
I want to promote Chris Tardy's chapter too, because she talks about how we can work out, since almost all our students know about the 5-paragraph essay, many of them do, how we can work out of that, how we can innovate out of that. And that's in the genre chapter. I think it's very good. So
if you haven't, since we're running out of time, if you haven't seen I'm going to put the Sandra Boynton cartoon up because it's really fun. Sandra Boynton, the great American children's writer, if you don't know who she is. I just love this because she says the introductory paragraph has lots of teeth but no bite. The development paragraphs have, some minor points, mostly bulk. And I love her description of the concluding paragraph, somewhat limp and drawn out, goes over the same ground as the 4 preceding paragraphs.
Right.
You can show sandwiches and traffic lights and hamburgers and all these different things. But actually, I think this is probably the most apt description. My point that I was going to just end with is that the 5-paragraph essay has nothing to do with the number of paragraphs. It's an approach to writing. Right. And I say this at conferences a lot, that everyone has seen things like this, right? Or the Boynton one. It's not the number of paragraphs, it's this way of looking at writing, that this is what writing is, that it is form over function, that situation is irrelevant, that writing is unsituated and can be detethered entirely from rhetorical situation, from audience, and it can be reduced to a formula. Yes, there are formulaic types of writing, there are highly conventional types of writing, as Chris has pointed out, I think, very well. But to say that all writing has a single formula, a single way of doing it, that's what the 5-paragraph essay is. It's a mindset more than it is a number of paragraphs. Because you can have wonderful writing that happens to have 5 paragraphs. And you can have 5-paragraph essays that are not actually 5 paragraphs, and they are still as dismal as a 5-paragraph essay. So, I think those are some of the ideas that I'm sure we're going to keep coming back to throughout the discussion. Does anyone have any final questions or comments you want to throw at us?
I'd like to think of it as, in a particular piece of writing, what the elements of that writing are. Mm-hmm. What needs to be included, not the, you know what I'm saying. Just,
yeah.
These are elements of a film reviewer. These are elements of an informational poster, or these are elements.
Right.
And that's what we really try to focus on. But the instructors are the ones that are really resistant. Mm-hmm. They just want, if I say, well, you can't teach the movie review starts with this and then that's this and that. You have to teach that it has elements, but this element could be in the beginning and that element could be in the middle, and they want a formula.
Yeah. The great thing to teach with that is the personal statement. Because in fact, no one, I think, can argue that there's one way to write a personal statement, but there are certain elements that have to be there. Right. I think it's a really great one to do.
Yeah. The example I always give is the detective, the mystery story, the Agatha Christie detective story, that unless it's Columbo, for those of you of a certain page. Unless you're doing Columbo, you do not start your detective story by saying the murder was committed by, Professor Plum in the library with the, with the vase of flowers or whatever it is. You let it unfold. You don't start with the main idea. That would just be, it wouldn't make sense. You let that reveal itself, right? We talked about problem solution writing. One of the strangest textbooks I ever looked at is a mass market textbook. It's out there from a major publisher who should know better. Presents examples of problem solution writing, which clearly show situation, problem, solution, evaluation, right? Which is that's how we write about problems and solutions. And they show this in the models, and then they get to the writing. It's like, you need a thesis statement that evaluates your solution. In other words, completely undermining everything the students have just seen in examples of writing, and basically setting students up to do bad writing. I don't get that, right? That's the thing which puzzles me. And the way I do this when I teach, do workshops and professional development events and things like that, and some of you may have been to these, I always start by saying, okay, what have you guys written in the last week or two? And I make a list of everything they've written. And no one has once said that they sit down and, jot out a 5-paragraph essay on an evening, right? It's never happened yet. Maybe it will. So someone will do it to me one day. But it's, and I say, well,
I'd like to apologize. It is I who is responsible for the drum beat.
Oh, thank you.
Yes, exactly.
You're taking up percussion now?
Yes, right, exactly.
But I just say, when you get teachers one way to get teachers to change, it's very hard to get teachers to change. And I'm not, that sounds more critical. I'm sorry, it's getting late here. But it is hard to resist things that we think we've always done. And one thing I try to set out in my chapter in the book is that we haven't always done it this way. The 5-paragraph essay is quite a recent phenomenon. And I think that historical context is quite useful. But just getting people to see that they themselves don't write this way, right? And they may have learnt to write this way. Some did, depending on where, when, and how long ago they went through their schooling. I didn't. I grew up in the UK, and we never encountered. I joke. I had 2 degrees before I knew what a thesis statement was. I'm still not completely sure. But if you get people to sort of say, these are the things I write, and say, okay, these are genres that you're telling me. And would you all agree that you write them differently? You don't write a shopping list the same way you write an email to your boss, the same way you write feedback to a student or a report card or the next great American novel. There's always someone in the room writing the next great American novel, right? Or fill in your own nationality. And just try to get people to see that in their own writing, they don't do this. And then it's also, why do you think students have to do it this way? And at least trying to get at the underlying myths and preconceptions. It takes a long time. Some of my colleagues I know are in the chat here and know how long I've been ranting about this in my own department, and we're not there yet. And this book is not designed to change the world by any means. It's just another step and a sort of a set of materials and arguments. And our conclusion, I think we try to address that question. Do we need to spend time teaching the thesis statement? I never teach the thesis statement. I hate the term thesis statement.
I don't know what a thesis statement is.
I don't know either.
My 40th year of teaching, and every time I ask writing teachers, they say, well, it's the claim. I said, well, then why don't you say it's the claim? Don't say it's the thesis statement.
Yeah, and students certainly don't. Yes, thank you. I got it. Sarcasm does just about come through in this thing. Yeah, unteaching this stuff is important. The last chapter of the book does have a section on what to do, how to present this to colleagues and administrators and what you can do. And one of our suggestions is join a book club like this and talk to the authors, which we are doing. And I think that's a good place to stop. Thank you all for your comments and questions. I really enjoyed this. This was fun.
Yeah, so thank you so much, Nigel and Anne. And we do intend to continue this. We'll invite other authors from the chapters to come in as well. And it may be at different times because we have authors who are spread out across the globe, basically. So we apologize for people whose time zones this wasn't ideal, but and for people who got confused on the time zones to begin with because of the way the announcements was sent out. But we're glad so many of you were able to come. And we did record this session, so we'll figure out how to put it somewhere that can be publicly accessible, and then share the links on Facebook and in the groups.io and my TESOL, so people who are we're interested. If your colleagues said they'd like to learn about this but didn't manage to come, they can.
Great, that's great.
I think we can save the chat as well. I'll see if I can do that from I think, have you done that? You can actually click save chat.
Yep, I've done
it. In fact,
it.
anyone can do that. Anyone on the call can go to the 3 dots in the chat box and click save chat. Somebody had just asked about that.
Yeah.
And I was going to say as well, I'm on the groups.io list as well. So if you've got questions, I'll be lurking around there. I'm happy to answer them, and you're welcome to track either of us down off list. You can find my email through TESOL or at the University of Delaware easily enough.
Likewise.
Thank you for reading the book.
Bye.
Enjoy it.
Bye.
Thank you for writing it.
Yeah.
It was fun, wasn't it?
It was a lot of work, actually.
It was a lot of work. It was a lot of work. We got to go finish another one.
Yeah.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.